"Sir, your wife fainted in the elevator, and we cannot reach the man who was with her." A 3 a.m. call from the hotel. That's how I found out. She was staying in a double room registered under another man's name. At 3 in the morning on Thursday, my phone rang. It was the Hotel Cataluna Attica. I didn't even know Laura was registered there. I certainly never knew you could book a double room in someone else's name, or that my wife would. And I absolutely never imagined that while I was pulling a night shift, fixing air conditioning at a mall, she was just 10 minutes from home, sharing a bed with a stranger. The receptionist called because, he said, Laura had fainted in the elevator. Someone found her semi-conscious on the floor. Her phone, they noted, had my number as the emergency contact. For one brief, blinding moment, I thought they had the wrong person. I asked if he was sure. He confirmed her full name. And then, as if delivering the final blow, he added, "The room is under the name of a certain Enrique." My stomach literally clenched. The blood drained from my gut and rushed straight to my face. It was hard to even swallow. I told him I was on my way. I didn't bother hanging up. I just dropped the phone on the car seat and sped off. In the 15 minutes it took to get there, I thought about every trivial, maddening thing except her. I worried about having to pay for the room. I panicked about how I'd explain this disaster to her parents. What the hell was she doing with some guy named Enrique in a hotel? But I didn't think about her. I didn't spare a single thought for whether she was okay. In that moment, I swear, all I wanted was answers. When I arrived, she was already conscious. An emergency doctor explained it was probably just a drop in blood pressure. Minor, nothing rest wouldn't fix. Laura refused to meet my eyes. She was still sitting on one of those upholstered hallway chairs, wrapped in a hotel robe, hair messy, cheeks flushed. But not from the fall. Shame, I promise you, is a lot easier to spot than a heart attack. I didn't ask a single question in front of them. I just told her I was taking her home. She nodded, small and defeated. As we passed the reception area, I saw a man heading out through the revolving door. He was tall, dark-haired, and well-dressed. He kept his eyes fixed on the floor, walking with a panicked hurry, the kind of person desperate to disappear without a trace. I don't know how, but a deep, cold certainty hit me. That was Enrique, and that's exactly where it all began. I didn't utter a word on the drive back, not because I didn't have 1,000 questions screaming in my head, but because I knew if I opened my mouth, a bomb would detonate, and I didn't want that war in the car. Laura was silent too. She just stared out the window, as if the glass held some fascinating secret. I dropped her off, watched her go inside, and went to park. When I got back, she had retreated into the bedroom and locked the bolt, behaving like a teenager hiding from her father after a late night. I collapsed onto the couch. I didn't take off my clothes or grab a blanket. My body was freezing, but my head was raging hot. At 6 a.m., my alarm went off. I went to work as if nothing had changed, but everything inside me was shaking violently. It wasn't until Saturday night that I decided we had to talk. We'd spent 2 days avoiding eye contact, speaking only the bare minimum, acting like awkward strangers sharing an apartment. That night, I sat down at the table with a beer in my hand and just said, flatly, "Okay, now explain the hotel to me." She froze for a few seconds, clearly weighing which lie to deploy. Then she offered, "It's not what it looks like. I stayed overnight because we got late. I was with some work colleagues celebrating closing a project. And well, I had a bit too much to drink." Her voice lacked conviction. She sounded like someone reciting a poorly memorized text for an exam. I just waited. I stayed silent. Then I asked, "Who is Enrique?" And that was the exact moment everything started to crumble. I had no grand plan or strategy. I just desperately needed her to say something. Anything. That didn't sound like a cheap, rehearsed excuse. What she did next was worse. She gave me the look she always used when we argued about something trivial, that dismissive face suggesting I was exaggerating, already fed up with my made-up insecurities. "Enrique is a friend. He was the one who stayed with me because the others left earlier. And that's it. There's nothing more to it." "And why was the room registered in his name?" She shrugged a careless, awful shrug. "Because he booked it. I didn't even know he was going to put it in his name. It wasn't important." She was treating me like I was a complete idiot. Not only was she lying, she was doing it badly. I could see the dishonesty in her breathing, her gestures, her frantic desire to end the conversation. She wasn't trying to clarify. She just wanted me to shut up. I stood up from the table and locked myself in the bathroom. I still don't know why. Maybe it was the one place, with the door sealed, where I could let myself be destroyed without her seeing it. I rested my forehead against the cool mirror. I tried to breathe deeply, but couldn't. My blood felt like it was boiling with rage, with helplessness, with pure disgust. Not just for the affair, but for how she was handling it, as if the truth wasn't even worth my time. I slept on the couch again that night. She didn't come looking for me. The next day, I asked for Enrique's number. She refused. She told me talking to him was pointless, that I would only make him uncomfortable. "You care more about his comfort than being honest with me?" I challenged. "I care about you not making a movie where there isn't one," she shot back. That's when I knew. If after 12 years together, she thought I was making a movie, then she didn't know me at all, or she simply didn't care anymore. That was the end. From then on, I started connecting the fragments. The vague excuses for coming home late. The nights she showered twice, even when she hadn't been doing anything strenuous. The small, meaningless arguments that had never existed before. The way her eyes flickered away when I talked about making future plans. Everything had been off for a long time. I just hadn't wanted to see it until it detonated in my face. The following Tuesday, I left work an hour early without telling her. I took the subway to her office building. I stood on the opposite sidewalk, pretending to look at my phone. At 7:27 p.m., she walked out. She wasn't alone. She came out with Enrique. I had never seen him, but the moment I saw him, I knew it was him. It was in the look she gave him, the way they walked side by side without touching, yet with the intense, familiar attention of people who have touched each other far too much. She didn't see me. They walked toward a gray car. He opened the passenger door. She got in. They drove off. I didn't follow them. I didn't want to become a psycho, and frankly, I didn't need to see 1 second more. That night, I kept quiet. I pretended to be asleep when she came in. She showered in silence, got into bed, and lay with her back to me. What hurt wasn't just the obvious betrayal. It was the crushing realization that there wasn't even the slightest intention left to fix the damage. She didn't apologize. She didn't attempt an explanation. She was just waiting for me to get over it. I wasn't getting over it. 2 days later, I showed up at her workplace again. This time, I walked into the building and asked to speak with Enrique. I lied, saying I was from an air conditioning company and needed to verify a maintenance issue with him. They had me wait in reception. When he appeared, I didn't even bother saying hello. I just blurted it out. "Have you been screwing my wife for a long time?" He went instantly pale, literally as if all the blood had been violently drained from his body. He mumbled for us to go outside. I followed him onto the sidewalk. "Look," he began. "I didn't know you were married to Laura." "I'm not interested in what you didn't know." I cut him off. "Is it still going on, or is it over?" He stayed silent. That was enough confirmation. I didn't hit him, even though every fiber of my being screamed for it. I just walked away without looking back. There was nothing left to confirm. I returned home, and there she was, on the couch, watching a series like it was any other evening. I sat down right in front of her. I already spoke with Enrique. Her face changed color in half a second. "What did you do?" "What you didn't dare to do," I asked, looking straight into her. She couldn't meet my gaze. "You know what infuriates me the most? That you didn't have the guts to tell me yourself. That you didn't even try to end it before I found out. That you're sitting here on the couch watching Netflix as if nothing's wrong, while I've been falling apart for days." She tried to justify herself. She stammered something about feeling lonely, about how things between us hadn't been the same, that she just didn't know how to explain it. It didn't matter anymore. It wasn't just what she did, it was the calculated way she hid it, how she shut me out. As if I didn't even have the right to suspect. That's when I knew, absolutely, that this marriage was beyond repair. The day after I told her I knew everything, Laura got up early, dressed, and left without breakfast. She didn't even try to talk to me before walking out the door. I had already decided two things. I wasn't sleeping on the couch again, and I wasn't staying quiet anymore. I had to get it all out, calmly or not, but without holding anything back. Throughout the day, I kept my mind buried in my work. But while checking some ventilation ducts, the thought kept circling. This apartment wasn't a home anymore. It was just an empty shell where two people were pretending they were still a couple. I left work early and stopped at a supermarket, buying just enough to make it look like a normal dinner. I set the table immediately when I got home, not out of courtesy, but to block any escape route to another room. When she came in and saw me sitting there, she silently dropped her bag. She stood still for a moment, waiting to see if I would speak first. I pointed to the chair. "Sit down. We're going to talk. For real this time." She didn't have to say it. Fear was clear on her face. Not of physical danger, but of the inevitable truth. She looked me straight in the eye and blurted out what I knew was coming. "I don't want to fight with you. I'm very tired." I replied that I didn't feel like fighting either, but that after 12 years, I deserved to be treated with dignity. I told her she could lie if she wanted, but she shouldn't treat me like some crazy psycho. There was a profound silence before she finally spoke. There was nothing serious. It was a few weeks where I was feeling bad and needed a distraction. He was just someone who was there. That single sentence hurt more than any other. It was as if I was just another piece of furniture in the apartment, easily ignored. I asked her when it started. She replied, "Recently." I told her Enrique had stumbled over his vowels when he talked to me on the sidewalk 2 days ago. I watched her visibly sink into her chair, understanding she had nowhere left to run. I didn't shout, but my voice felt like it was being forced up from the very bottom of my body. "You could have told me. Even a breakup would hurt less than your silence these past few days." She switched instantly into excuse mode. "I was afraid you'd react badly. You're impulsive, and I thought you were going to do something violent." I challenged her to give me a single example in all our years together where I had been violent. She couldn't find one. "Then don't use that lie to justify what you did." She answered that she didn't know what to say, that thinking was hard when I pressured her. I told her it had been hard for me to breathe since the night at the hotel. That's when she exploded. She jumped up from the chair and started throwing the blame back at me, saying I wasn't perfect either, that I came home tired and didn't talk much, that she'd felt lonely for months, that I didn't listen like I used to, that we were living like roommates, that she felt invisible. You weren't like this when I met you. You seem like a different person years ago. I replied, that routine gets to all of us. But that is not a reason to sleep with someone else and then come home as if nothing happened just because an uncomfortable conversation is hard. It doesn't screw up trust like what you did. I reminded her that I'd had bad times, too, but I never looked for a distraction with another person because I understood that avoiding problems never solves them. The argument got heated, but I held my voice. She accused me of judging her from a position of moral superiority and called it unfair. I said what was unfair was me taking care of her in a hospital, all while knowing the call came from a hotel where she'd registered with another man. My patience ran out completely. I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to answer me, looking me in the eyes. She swallowed hard. Did you sleep with him in that room? It took her a few agonizing seconds, but she said it clearly. Yes. I felt the room tilt slightly, but I stood my ground, refusing to look defeated. I asked her how many times and since when. She refused, saying she didn't want to get into details. I insisted. That's when she started to cry. It wasn't the broken, overflowing cry of genuine pain, though. It was the controlled, strategic cry of someone trying to diffuse a conflict. I told her tears were useless now, because what I felt was far beyond sadness. I was furious, and I needed to understand exactly how deep the hole she'd opened between us went. She argued that if I'd been emotionally unwell these past few days, I should understand that she'd been unwell for months. I replied that being unwell was one thing, and planning dates behind your partner's back was another thing entirely. She claimed she didn't plan them, that it all just happened little by little. That felt worse. It wasn't a single mistake, it was a repeated decision. I asked if she was still seeing him. She looked down and quietly said yes. That's when a strange mix of calm and pity washed over me. I told her then it made no sense to keep up the pretense. If she wanted to be with him, she should just say so. She considered it, thinking for a long, quiet moment, evaluating the next months of her life. I'm not in love with him, but I don't want to be with you like this either. That sentence was the final, absolute confirmation. There was no way back. I got up from the table, wanting to throw open every window, not for air, but to banish the suffocating silence. She came closer and told me she didn't want to hurt me. That's when I couldn't contain a raw gesture of rage. I slammed my fist on the table, not out of violence, but because I needed a boundary marked. You already did, I said. You can save that line. She took a step back, leaning against the wall. She started speaking in a softer, lower tone. You used to look at me differently. We were closer. You didn't touch me the same way anymore. We had sex out of routine. I needed to feel something, and I found it somewhere else. I didn't say anything for half a minute. I just stared at her. I didn't recognize this woman. I told her that if she needed to feel something, she could have tried therapy, arguments, trips, honest conversations, anything, but not this. She replied that I didn't understand what it was like to feel dead inside. I didn't answer because I knew I would shout. I told her to go to a friend's house for a few days or get a hotel. I needed the space, but she shouldn't take her things yet. We still had things to discuss. Everything built over so many years couldn't be buried in a single conversation. She refused to leave. She said it was her house, too. Perfect, I said. I'll go. I grabbed a couple of items of clothing, stuffed them into a backpack, and told her I'd be back the next day to continue this discussion. Just before I closed the door, she blurted out, I don't want you to hate me. I replied, that's not for you to decide. I closed the door with a strange feeling, colder than sadness. My body felt like it was waiting for instructions from a mind that had short-circuited. I got in my car and drove around the city aimlessly for an hour, just watching the streets full of people who had no idea what disaster was unfolding in my life. I parked near the Royal Palace, turned off the engine, and just sat there. I didn't cry. I didn't hit anything. I just felt a monumental, shapeless weight pressing down on me. I reviewed everything we said. I knew the next conversation wouldn't be a dialogue. It would be the beginning of closing a book I never expected to close. That night, I slept in a cheap hostel near Opera. I didn't count sheep. I didn't even need a pillow. I just stared at the ceiling until dawn, completely unsure if the day that was starting belonged to me or to some other man I hadn't met yet. When I left that hostel, a decision was set in my head. I wasn't going to let this end with a simple, I'm sorry from Laura. Nor was I going to lose control. No hitting her, no public scene. I wouldn't be that man. My reaction had to hurt her, not physically, but where she truly kept her value, her public image. I had always known this about her. She fiercely protected the image of being serious at work, mature for her family, responsible with friends, and organized with everything. What I did had to be precise, understated, but strong enough for her to finally feel the weight of her betrayal. Cheating was one thing. Pretending everything was fine with everyone else was another. I returned to the apartment mid-afternoon without calling. I walked in, and she was comfortably on the couch, laptop open, coffee mug in hand. She looked at me like I was a guest who had arrived too early. She didn't stand up. She just said, "I thought you'd be gone for a few more days." I replied that I had no intention of hiding from my own house, and that since she wasn't leaving, she had to listen to what I'd decided. She sat up straighter, like she was preparing for a formal report. I saw it as a gesture of distance, and it helped me solidify my own clarity. There was no room left for sentimentality. I opened my laptop on the table and showed her a document. It was a draft for a separation of assets, simple but well written, thanks to a colleague who knew about these things. It wasn't a divorce yet, but the steps were clear. We would start living separately, though legally married for the time being. I saw genuine discomfort flash across her face. She hadn't expected me to be so organized. She probably imagined I'd just lock myself away to cry or rage aimlessly. I told her, "If you want to be with someone else, I accept it. But I'm not going to let you pretend to still be here while you live a parallel life. Since you weren't ready to leave, I prepared this." Instead of anger, she blurted out, "You don't have to take this so far." I simply replied that she had already taken it that far. Up until that moment, I hadn't truly felt she was taking responsibility. She offered to talk properly, suggesting couples therapy, saying she just needed time to understand herself and didn't want to destroy what we had built. I replied that what we wanted to build was already destroyed the moment she walked into that room with Enrique. She reacted by calling me dramatic, arguing that an affair didn't have to ruin an entire marriage. That was the breaking point. I got up, went to the bedroom, and came back with a folder containing a flash drive. I said, "I have photos from the hotel and copies of messages between you and him from the last few days. We'd better talk about this calmly, because you decided this whole thing should start this way, not me." Her expression changed completely, turning pale. She took a deep, shaky breath. For the first time, I saw her genuinely nervous. She stood up from the couch. "Are you going to use them against me?" I replied that I had no intention of blackmailing her. The flash drive was merely a reminder that I wasn't relying on assumptions. But I made it absolutely clear. I wouldn't stay silent in front of her family, or the people who thought our life was perfect. In Madrid, appearances mean everything, and she guarded hers like gold. I said, "I'm going to tell your parents and your sister. I'm not going to keep quiet. I'm not going to disguise your betrayal as a communication problem. Things will be said as they are." She called that cruel. "What was cruel?" I replied, "was sleeping with him while I was working nights to pay for this apartment." We weren't shouting, but the tension in the room was heavier than any fight. She started begging me not to tell her family. That's when I finally found her weak spot. I didn't need to insult her, or cry, or beg for understanding. I just needed her to bear the consequences of her choices. "This isn't revenge," I told her. "It's the truth. And the truth isn't hidden just because it makes you uncomfortable." Then she really did cry, but it wasn't a cry seeking compassion. It was a cry of genuine concern for her reputation. She confirmed that was what hurt her most. Not the end of the marriage, not the cheating, but what people would think. That night, I slept in the bed. She went to the couch. We didn't exchange another word. At 10 o'clock the next morning, I called her sister and asked her to come to the house immediately, saying it was important. I didn't explain anything over the phone. She arrived in 40 minutes. Laura tried to hide things, tidying herself up as if she needed to present an unblemished version of herself. When her sister walked in, I did something I'd never done. I spoke without softening anything. I told her Laura had been seeing another man for weeks, that I found out from a hotel call, and that she had confirmed everything. Laura tried to interrupt me, but I just raised my hand, and she fell silent. Her sister stood in shock. I asked Laura to say it herself. She refused initially. I insisted. Finally, she choked it out. Her sister put her hands to her face. She didn't demand details, only asked if it had been physical or just emotional. Laura just said, "Yes, it happened." Her sister didn't cry. She did something that truly surprised me. She stood up and said, "I'm leaving." Then she added, "You're adults, but don't expect my support in this." And she left, closing the door without looking back. I didn't have to say anything else. Laura sat at the table with dry eyes and a completely lost look. That's when I knew my decision had been right. I didn't need a public scandal or theatrical revenge. I only needed her to face the consequences, like we all must when we make a terrible mistake. For the first time since this nightmare began, she understood she no longer controlled the situation, that she couldn't hide, and that apologies and a hug wouldn't fix this. As I was leaving, I spoke the last words I wanted her to hear that day. "I don't plan on destroying your life, but I'm not going to build any more lies with you either." I left the apartment to walk, completely aimless, but I didn't feel lost anymore. For the first time, I felt she had no power over me. That was my revenge. From this moment on, every decision would rest on her shoulders, not mine. I wasn't going to sink her further, but I wasn't going to hold her up ever again. 3 days after her sister walked out on her, Laura sent me a text mid-morning asking if she could come back home that night to talk. I had stayed in the apartment, but we barely saw each other. She left early and came back late, avoiding all contact, leaving written notes instead of speaking. It was as if her presence was already a ghost, even though her clothes were still in the closet. I replied with a simple yes. I wanted this dragged out no longer. That afternoon, I prepared the apartment for the final conversation. No TV, no dirty dishes, no music. Just two chairs facing each other and the necessary, deafening silence to finally close this story. When she arrived, she didn't even take off her coat. She sat down with her purse on her lap, hands clasped. I looked at her for a few long seconds before speaking, not for dramatic effect, but because I needed to confirm there was nothing left in her expression that could confuse me. There wasn't. The person in front of me was no longer my wife. She was just someone with whom I had shared years that were now simply gone. I told her I didn't want to fight or accuse her, that every emotion had already run its course in my head. The pain, the rage, the shame, the disappointment, the wounded pride, the nostalgia for what was, and the crushing emptiness for what would never be. She looked down and said, quietly, I don't want to argue either. I asked if she was still seeing Enrique. She said no. After her sister found out, he felt exposed, and they weren't seeing each other anymore. I wasn't surprised, nor was I relieved. I told her whether she continued with him or not was irrelevant. The damage was done, and the decisions we make when no one is watching are the only ones that truly matter. She took a deep breath and agreed. I asked if she wanted to stay with me, but told her to think carefully before answering. It took her over a minute to speak. Finally, she said she wasn't sure. She loved me, but she no longer knew if we were compatible. All this chaos had stirred up things she didn't expect. She felt guilty, but also hopelessly confused. I told her it hurt, but I understood, and that I was sure. I didn't want to be with someone who had done what she did. I couldn't trust her anymore. I admitted that even though I still struggled to sleep at night, I also felt a deep sense of relief for finally knowing the truth. She looked at me and said, I never thought you'd be the one to leave me. I replied, I'm not leaving you. You started leaving before I did. You just did it in secret. She had no answer. She sat in silence, just staring at her hands. I told her it was better not to try patching things up. If we were going to separate, we needed to do it now, with everything clear. We had papers to sign, accounts to divide, a landlord to talk to. We had to be adults. She said she didn't want to leave the apartment that very night, that she needed at least a week to find somewhere to stay. I told her she could sleep on the couch, but she couldn't use it as an excuse to delay the inevitable. She agreed. Then she started talking about more personal things, as if having lost everything had made her newly sincere. She said she truly hadn't thought it would hurt me so much. She had always seen me as strong, maybe even cold. I replied that appearing strong is one thing, but not having a human heart burning inside you is a very different one. She said she thought that over time, we could have mended things. I told her you can't mend trust with someone who one day looks you in the eye as if nothing happened after sharing a bed with another person. That level of betrayal can't be erased with willpower, therapy, or hugs. I told her I had tried. I fought the desire to hurt her, chose not to humiliate her, and held myself back from destroying her reputation. But I couldn't build a future on the shattered image she had left me with. She asked if she could take her things that same week. I said yes, but to let me know when she would do it so I wouldn't be present, not out of resentment, but because I couldn't watch her pack memories that had lost all value for both of us. I asked her to leave the keys on the entryway table when she was done. She nodded. Then she asked a truly absurd question. Do you think we could ever be friends? I laughed, not with mockery, but at the sheer ridiculousness of it. I told her our situation wasn't a fight over differences or money, or a gradual drifting apart. I reminded her that what destroyed our relationship was conscious lying, sustained deceit, and contempt for the other person when care was most needed. I told her I couldn't be her friend. Maybe over time, I would stop hating her, but I had zero interest in rebuilding any kind of relationship from this rubble. She finally understood. She didn't insist. She sat for a few more minutes. I don't know if she was waiting for me to say something, to regret it, to beg her to reconsider. I didn't. Neither did she. Finally, she stood up, looked at me one last time as if trying to memorize my face in that moment, and said, I'm sorry, truly. I told her it was no use anymore. She went to the bedroom, closed the door, and I didn't see her again all night. I stayed in the kitchen, watching the clock, waiting for time to rewind. But when time breaks something, it never goes back. The next day, we didn't share breakfast. We didn't even run into each other in the bathroom. I left early, not for work, but just to escape the atmosphere. I walked through the streets of my own neighborhood like a stranger. I sat on a bench, thinking about whether I had done the right thing. I had. I knew it. But it hurt anyway. Not because I wanted her back, but because I never expected things to end this way with the person I chose as my life partner. I thought about the trips, the silly arguments, the Saturday dinners, the repeated movies, the inside jokes that now meant nothing. And I realized the hardest part wasn't losing her. It was accepting that she had ceased to exist long before I finally realized it. I returned to the apartment at noon. Laura was gone. I assumed she'd left for work or to look for a place. The keys weren't on the entryway table yet, but the air felt instantly different. It was no longer her home. It was a neutral space. I sat by the window and allowed myself to just exist for a while, without thinking about anything. For the first time in weeks, I felt a little bit of rest. Not joy, not total relief, but the ability to simply breathe. When Laura finally left the apartment for good, I knew it without needing to see her. There was no letter, no message, no closing conversation. I simply came home one day and her things were gone. The bedroom closet had an empty space that hadn't been there before. The bathroom drawers only held my products. The living room bookshelf was missing the designed books she collected. On a coaster in the entryway, her keys lay alone, without a note, without a single word. That was it. She didn't announce it. She didn't ask for help. She didn't leave any questions. She just closed the door and finished disappearing. I also knew it because of the way the air in the apartment changed. It was colder now, flatter, easier to inhale. It didn't feel defensive like it had in the previous weeks, or heavy like the days after the argument. It was simply at peace. And as strange as it sounds, it was the best thing that had happened since everything broke. The first few days after that were a kind of limbo. I didn't feel euphoria or intense sadness. There was a stable, low feeling, without sudden ups or downs. I did a deep clean, not just for practical reasons, but because I needed to see the apartment differently. I threw away things I didn't need, gave others away, moved the furniture, changed the position of the bed, took down a painting we had bought together. I didn't do it out of spite. I did it because I wanted to inhabit a new space without changing my address. Some friends texted me to hang out and get my mind off things, but I didn't feel like telling the whole story out loud. I replied politely and stayed home. It wasn't isolation. It was necessary rest. For weeks, I had been sleeping with my jaw clenched and my body tense. Now, finally, I was getting 7 hours of sleep without waking up in the middle of the night wondering what horrible thing was left to discover. I never talked to her again. She didn't write. She didn't call. She didn't ask about anything. I assumed she rebuilt her life in her own way. Maybe she stayed with Enrique, maybe not. It was no longer my concern. I didn't look for her either. Not out of pride or strategy. I simply had nothing left to say. What we had built had run its course. There wasn't even the desire for reconstruction left, and that gave me profound peace. What scared me most at the beginning wasn't that she had cheated. It was the fear that I would be trapped forever in the doubt of whether I should give her another chance. But that wasn't what happened. She left, and I felt no desire for her to come back. Sometimes I wondered if that was coldness or clarity. Over time, I realized it was neither. It was simply consequence. You reach the end of something when you've gone through everything you had to go through, and you can no longer find a single reason to stay. That's what happened to me. I didn't have a grand epiphany. I didn't have a revelation. I just saw that there was nothing left to hold on to. And I chose not to keep pushing a door that she had already closed long ago. Over time, I settled into the new routine. I cooked for one. I took care of the apartment at my own pace. I chose the series without negotiating the remote. I slept with the door open. I did the grocery shopping without a second list. I spent weekends walking around Madrid, not trying to distract myself, but intending to look at the city with new eyes. I started seeing friends again little by little. Some knew the story. Others just knew I was separated. I didn't give details, not to protect her, but because I didn't want to repeat a version of events as if I needed to convince anyone. What happened was resolved for me. I didn't need validation or compassion. It was enough that I had made a decision that left me at peace. A month after the last day I saw her, I ran into her mother on the street. It was accidental, near the exit of a fruit shop in the neighborhood. She approached me with a mix of surprise and nervousness. She asked if I had a moment. I said yes. She told me she had found out everything from her other daughter, that she was terribly sorry, that she didn't understand it, that Laura wasn't like that. I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to correct her. I simply said that sometimes people do things that not even they themselves understand, and that the important thing was for each of us to find our own way without dragging the other down. She said she was very fond of me, that she considered me family, and that she was sorry things ended this way. I thanked her for the kindness and left. It was a short, but necessary, conversation. It reminded me that even in the midst of a breakup, some bonds aren't instantly erased by infidelity. With my own family, it was different. I didn't give them details at first. I just said Laura and I had separated. My parents asked if I was okay. I told them yes, and they didn't press. Weeks later, when I had more clarity, I told part of the story to my brother. He listened without interrupting, without judging, without giving empty advice. He told me I had done the right thing by refusing to be trapped by the idea of saving something that was already dead. I felt understood, not by his words, but by the silence he respected. There are times when you just need someone to know the truth, without trying to fix everything. Over time, I found new interests. I started reading books I had pending. I resumed a basic exercise routine. I went to small concerts and saw a play. I even dared to take an online course on electrical systems, something I always put off. It wasn't a dramatic transformation. It was a natural adjustment. I no longer thought about Laura every day. I no longer replayed the events, nor did I wonder what would have happened if I'd chosen differently. What happened had a cause and a consequence. I understood it. I faced it. I resolved it. Not perfectly, not quickly, but honestly. And that, finally, left me at peace. Now, months later, when someone asks me if I'm okay, I don't have to pretend. I'm fine, just at peace. Without lies around me, without grudges, without a double life. Sometimes someone tells me I look more serious, that I seem different. Maybe I am. I don't know. But if I learned anything in this whole process, it's that you can't cling to an idea of love just because it has history. History doesn't protect you from anything. It's what you do today that builds or destroys. And Laura chose to destroy. I chose not to stay where I was no longer welcome. Will I fall in love again? I don't know. I'm in no hurry, nor am I afraid. What I have now is something far more valuable, clarity. I'm not waiting for a new relationship to feel complete. I'm already complete. I've learned that forgiving isn't forgetting or justifying. Forgiving, in my case, was simply closing the door without hatred, without wanting revenge, but also without waiting for explanations that were never going to come. That's how a story truly ends. Not with screams, not with tears, but with a firm decision. And I've already made mine. Do you think Laura will ever truly understand that her concern for her reputation was more destructive to the marriage than the act of infidelity itself? Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Share your thoughts about this story in the comments.